I entered court disguised as a man. I planned to serve the empire, finish my term, and walk away clean. Then the emperor's first love declared she would marry no one but me, the man I was pretending to be. The emperor tore my disguise apart, and instead of killing me, he locked me in the palace as his noble consort. That alone should have been enough to ruin me, but the real disaster was outside the palace walls. The woman my brother married was not a bandit's daughter. She was the last princess of the fallen dynasty. By the time I learned the truth, I had already stepped into a conspiracy designed to topple our throne from within. Chapter 1. The emperor's long-lost first love had finally returned to the capital. Yet the first thing she said was that she would marry no one but me. The emperor was so enraged, he said he would castrate me with his own hands. Only then did he discover I was a woman. The minister Shen he had been matching wits with in court, the minister who sparred with him day after day before all officials, was a woman. His hand shook as he lifted my trousers with the tip of his blade. At that moment, his world must have collapsed beyond repair. In truth, Minister Shen was indeed a man. That man was my elder brother, Ethan Shen, and I, Claire Shen, resembled him by 7 or 8 parts, only half a head shorter. With a bit of disguise, I could pass for him without raising suspicion. My brother had gone to suppress bandits, but was kidnapped by a female bandit chief on Flying Tiger Mountain. We considered it a humiliation beyond endurance. When we led troops to rescue him, we found him unwilling to be rescued, drunk on their affection. He even wanted to retire to the mountains with that woman to live as an immortal couple. All persuasion failed. There was nothing else we could do. Father had no choice but to make me temporarily assume my brother's post as minister. To the outside world, we announced that the Shen family's daughter had fallen gravely ill and gone to recover on a country estate. My brother was too upright by nature, while I had been smooth and adaptable since childhood. Once I assumed his identity, I moved through the court like a fish in clear water. Promotion after promotion came easily. All the more because I possessed a refined face, a sharp tongue, and a talent for debate. My words landed clean and lethal. I secretly captured the hearts of countless young ladies from powerful families. The emperor's long-cherished first love, the only daughter of General Zuo, was among those girls. Her name was Lydia Zuo. She had grown up in the military camps. Men of iron blood and steel discipline were all she had ever seen. Then one day she saw me. Pale-skinned, soft-featured, my tongue sharp as a blade as I argued down a hall full of ministers. The contrast between my scholar's appearance and my aggression in debate struck her like lightning. She fell for me at first sight, and deeper the second. She rode thousands of miles back from the frontier garrison just to beg the emperor for a marriage decree. I heard the emperor had been in love with her for 10 years. So when he learned this petition came from her own mouth, he must have been furious beyond measure. But that fury was doused entirely with one cold shock. The woman he chased for 10 years preferred me. The grief that followed was almost insulting. His masculine pride could not compare to a single woman. Your Majesty, I told him while fastening my belt, Lady Lydia may just be acting on impulse. Perhaps she's merely testing if you still have her in your heart. Just then, a sudden warmth slid down my legs. Damn, my monthly bleeding had arrived, and I had rushed into the palace so quickly, I miscounted the days. My abrupt silence made him suspicious. He turned and saw my face stiffen and the spreading red stain on my trousers. His expression twisted with guilt and alarm. "Brother Shen, did my sword injure you?" "This is my fault. Let me see where you were cut." He reached for me, assuming he had hurt me earlier. I dodged him, silently cursing whether the emperor was missing a string in his brain. We were locked in this stalemate when Lydia Zuo burst through the doors. She had heard the emperor intended to castrate me. She stormed in full of rage, but when she saw the sword on the ground and the blood soaking my clothes, her face went stark white. "Brother Shen, could it be?" Her tear-rimmed eyes held horror, disbelief, heartbreak. The emperor and I both waved our hands frantically. No, absolutely not. But Lydia had already begun to cry. Her sobs were so raw and miserable that it could have drowned the entire palace. "Is this fate?" she wept. "Am I to be a widow before I even enter the door?" The emperor panicked. jumping up and down trying to explain, yet he could not reveal the truth. If she cried any longer, by tomorrow the entire capital would know that Minister Shen was incapable. Forgive me, brother. Even though I truly wanted to explain, I absolutely refused to. Lydia Zuo left without delay. She declared she would search the world for a cure to restore my manhood. After that incident, the women who used to hover around me like sparrows disappeared in large numbers. But the emperor began behaving strangely. Before, he would clash with me in court every single morning, our arguments so fierce the entire hall would hold its breath. Now, when I speak, he lowers his gaze, cheeks faintly pink. He nods obediently. Minister Shen speaks with great wisdom. The officials exchanged baffled glances and whispered among themselves. More absurd still, he began rewarding me with piles of woven brocade and chests of pearls and jade. As an unmarried minister with no women in my residence, what in heaven's name did he expect me to do with these? Rumors surged again. They said the minister had refused to marry for years. The emperor, since ascending the throne, had never held another beauty selection. Perhaps something improper between sovereign and minister was not impossible. My brother wrote to scold me for ruining his good name, and in the end invited me to visit Flying Tiger Mountain to see my sister-in-law. He said we could gather before the new year, and that he would soon return, making my masquerade unnecessary. Indeed, father and mother still refused to accept that bandit woman as daughter-in-law. So a few days before the new year, I requested leave from the emperor and set off for Flying Tiger Mountain. Dense forest rose like walls on both sides when a glow of flames appeared ahead, illuminating a great crowd of people. Leading them stood a pair like carved jade, my brother and his beloved bandit wife. She was unlike any boudoir maiden, tall, steady, built with strength. Standing next to her, my brother looked almost like a pampered weakling. At once, she pressed a hand warmer into my palms, then stripped off her fox fur cloak and wrapped me tightly. Her expression was stern and aloof, but her gestures were impossibly gentle. I raised my head and realized the torches extended all the way up the mountainside like a river of fire flowing against gravity. Your sister-in-law feared you might be afraid of the dark, my brother boasted. She arranged it specially. Do you like it? I laughed. And what did you prepare for my New Year's gift? He wrapped an arm around her and kissed her right there, shameless before me. In this place I live off my wife. Everything is hers. I merely eat soft rice. Even more like a pampered weakling indeed. My sister-in-law gave me the largest room to stay in. The moment I walked in, I was nearly blinded. All the furniture was made of the finest red sandalwood. The tea bowls and dishes were pure gold. The dressing table held several lacquered chests filled with jewelry, pearls, agate, gemstones, solid gold. On the floor lay thick, layered brocade from Shu, embroidered with lifelike kittens and puppies. No doubt my brother had told her. I adored soft little creatures. I snuck a glance at her. She, too, was watching me. In those stern brows lay an almost imperceptible tension. Then I understood. Thank you, I said brightly. I love it. I took her hand and threw myself into her arms. She did not speak, but warmth bloomed across her cheeks. At last she reached out hesitantly and patted my head. So the bandit woman was tough only on the outside, her inner heart gentler than silk. No wonder my brother surrendered completely. Perhaps father and mother would love her too. That night, fireworks burst above the camp. Everyone sang and danced around a great bonfire. I sat roasting meat happily, watching my brother dance in a ridiculous, lopsided manner. I laughed until my sides ached. Then a young boy in strange clothing appeared before me. His sleeves were wide, his robes bright and embroidered with exotic birds and beasts. I had seen clothing like that, somewhere. Smiling shyly, he scratched his head, as if to invite me to dance. I was about to accept when suddenly the noise around us died. My sister-in-law strode toward us, face clouded. My brother, too, stared at the boy with a grim expression. Why did you wear that? Go back. Now. The boy froze in fear before being dragged away by relatives. Claire, my sister-in-law said softly, forgive us. That garment is used for ancestral rites. A child wearing it violates the rules. Every family has its own customs. No harm done. My sister-in-law prepared the largest chamber for me. The moment I stepped in, I was almost dazzled. The furniture was crafted from premium red sandalwood. The cups and bowls were pure gold. On the dressing table lay several large jewelry caskets, filled with pearls, agates, gemstones, and gold. The carpet was layered shoe brocade, embroidered with lifelike kittens and puppies. My brother must have told her. I loved all furry little things. I glanced at her from the corner of my eye. She, too, was watching me. Though her expression remained cold and rigid, something nervous flickered faintly between her brows. I understood at once. "Thank you, sister," I said sweetly. "I love it." I grabbed her hand and buried myself in her arms. Though unused to such gestures, a warm blush rose to her cheeks, her lips struggling not to curve up. After a moment's hesitation, she reached out and gently stroked my hair. So the bandit woman was iron on the outside, tender within. No wonder my brother surrendered himself willingly. Perhaps father and mother would love her too. That night, the village set off fireworks. We gathered around a huge bonfire, singing, laughing, dancing. I sat aside happily roasting meat, watching my brother tumble through a ridiculous dance, and laughed till I bent double. Then a boy in odd clothing appeared before me. His wide sleeves and brilliantly colored robe embroidered with rare beasts and birds. I had definitely seen such attire before. He smiled shyly and seemed about to invite me to dance, but suddenly the revelry stopped. My sister-in-law strode over, face dark. My brother, too, stared with a grave expression. "Why are you wearing that? Go back at once." The boy froze in fright before being dragged away by nearby kin. "Forgive us, Claire," my sister-in-law softened as she turned to me. "That garment is worn only during ancestral rites. A child wearing it breaks ancestral law." So that was all. Every clan has its customs. Nothing amiss. The feast dampened a little after that and dispersed soon, but I noticed steam rising from a hot spring nearby. Unable to resist, I ran toward it. My sister-in-law set my drunken brother to rest, then brought things and followed to keep watch for me. She washed my hair there. Her slender fingers gently massaged my scalp as we chatted idly. She told me she once had a younger sister like me, sweet and adorable, who fell in love with the wrong man and lost her life for it. I hurried to console her. "I can be your younger sister?" I said. "And I will never love the wrong person, nor leave you and my brother." She looked at my earnest face and smiled at last. She thanked heaven for granting her a new family. When I departed some days later, she personally saw me off. She packed boxes of good things into my carriage until it bulged. "Claire, may all go smoothly for you." She tucked a thick red envelope into my arms. "Sister," I grinned. "Once I return and work harder, I'll prepare a grand bridal gift and bring my brother to marry you in glory." "Good," she said, leaning against my brother's shoulder, radiant with quiet happiness. A month after I returned to the capital, 3 major events occurred. First, my brother returned to court, so I no longer needed to masquerade as Minister Shen. I resumed my true identity as Miss Claire Shen. Second, Lydia Zuo entered the palace. It seemed the emperor finally had what he had long wished for. Third, the former princess of the previous dynasty, Ariel Anne, and the remaining rebels were captured and scheduled for execution in 3 days. I wondered why my sister-in-law had not returned with my brother. I wrote to her, but received no reply. A faint unease took root in me. Not until I saw a familiar figure at the execution ground where the rebels were to be sentenced did I understand everything. My sister-in-law's surname was Anne. Her name, Ariel Anne, the woman my brother loved so deeply, was the very princess condemned for treason. He, now a judge in court, was to declare her execution. She stood like a pool of still water, thin, exhausted, with no light left in her face. I still remembered her once saying with quiet joy, "Thank heaven for giving me a new family." In the crowd, our eyes met from afar. For the first time, light returned to her gaze. Her lips moved. Hot spring. The command fell. "Time is up. Execute." A wooden token dropped. My brother stood by, hands clasped behind his back, expression perfectly calm. Blade rose. Blade fell. I searched his eyes for any flicker, but found none. He looked truly like an unshakable mountain. My sister-in-law's tears never fell, but waves crashed behind her eyes. She looked at him not with hatred, but with a strange sort of release, as if to say, "So this is how it ends." Their heads were hung on the city wall to wither under sun and wind. Only later did I learn. That strange garment, The boy wore that night was not ceremonial dress for ancestors, but royal garb worn only at celebrations of the former dynasty. No doubt that was what exposed her identity to my brother. My brother fell ill, for no known reason. On the morning before court, he suddenly coughed blood. I saw the package he had opened on his desk. Inside lay a box of moldy dumplings his wife had prepared for him before they parted. He only opened it now. He had once written to me boasting that her dumplings were unmatched beneath heaven. That steadfast mountain in his heart collapsed the moment he saw those small dumplings. All their tender memories tangled into a single net, strangling him so tightly he could never walk out of it. I secretly returned to Flying Tiger Mountain, to the hot spring my sister-in-law had once mentioned. Tiny bubbles rose from the steaming water. I stood staring at them for a long time. At last, the boy could no longer hold his breath. He burst from the water, gasping violently. So, he had hidden beneath the spring that night, and survived. His ability to hold his breath was indeed impressive. It was the same boy who had once shyly invited me to dance. He looked at me with hostility now, his eyes brimming with hatred. "Go," I told him, "bury the bodies of your kin." I did not look at him again. I turned and left. He followed after me step by step, hot steam still rising from his body, his wet hair sticking to his shoulders, his teeth chattering in the cold. I paused, unfastened my cloak, and threw it to the ground behind me. Whether he used it or not was his choice. The severed heads had finally been taken down from the city wall and dumped in the mass grave to the east of the capital. The boy and I stole the remains under cover of night. We dug from daylight to darkness until a large pit was carved from the earth. He knelt before the grave and knocked his head 3 times. "Take me in." He grabbed my sleeve and wiped his face harshly. Only then did I truly see him clearly. His face was startlingly beautiful for a youth, his skin almost translucent, his eyes bright and sharp. I do not like trouble. Yet seeing the resemblance between his brows and hers, I answered him vaguely. "I will ensure you have food, clothing, a future wife and child someday. That much I can do." He was the half-brother of Ariel Ann. His name was Adrian Ann. Only 15, 2 years younger than I. Huddled in the carriage like a shelled lychee trembling in my hand, he looked so pitiful I could not bring myself to kill him. I placed him in a manor outside the city, assigned several mute servants to him, and began planning how to conceal his identity. To eliminate a weed, one must pull it out with its roots. I knew this truth well. It would cost me nothing to kill him with my own hands. And yet, I decided to let him live. I left the manor secretly thereafter. But before the carriage had gone far, I saw him up a tree, looking down at me with damp, shining eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Several leaves broke loose with the trembling of his voice and fell onto my shoulder. I once believed Lydia Zuo would be made empress, for the emperor had cherished her for 10 long years, yet he granted her only the title of imperial consort Hui. Lydia was a woman of fierce temper and unrestrained habits. There was nothing gentle about her, despite the title. When the weather turned from chill to mild and the willow buds first emerged, my brother, who had been bedridden, recovered suddenly. Our mother was overjoyed. She accepted an invitation from the Song Chancellor's household. A plum blossom gathering, she said, though in truth it was a grand marriage market. My brother looked wan and lacked color in his cheeks, but when he saw my interest, he accompanied me regardless. After the death of my sister-in-law, our conversations had grown sparse. Whenever I looked upon him, I would recall the line of torchlight she had ordered along the mountainside, those flames climbing upward like a river of fire. That day, the red plum blossoms burned like sparks of fire along the branches, and that same fire reflected in my brother's gaze. He stared fixedly at a distant spot before tugging urgently at my sleeve. "Claire, look! Does she not resemble?" "Resemble who?" I turned, and at once understood. Beyond the sea of blossoms, surrounded by attendants, stood a young lady in pale yellow, smiling with bright eyes. Her brows and eyes bore an uncanny likeness to Ariel Ann, yet livelier, untouched by sorrow. She was Mei Song, daughter of the Song Chancellor. Naturally, a carefree young noble lady could not carry the tragic heaviness of a princess awaiting execution. After that day, my brother's spirits transformed completely, as though his long illness had been only a dream. He grew close to Miss Song. His manner toward her was exceedingly gentle. He flew kites with her, hunted a rare white tiger for her amusement. I could not tell whether he had always been such a tender man, or whether all the love he once bore for Ariel had been poured entirely into this new girl. Mei Song, too young and too soft, was easily overwhelmed by such affection. One day he took her hand. His eyes glowed with fervent devotion as he said to me, solemnly, "Claire, this will be your sister-in-law." A sourness blossomed in my chest. Looking into Miss Song's brilliant, innocent eyes, I thought of that calm, unsmiling face now gone from the earth. My brother soon proposed marriage, and brought gifts to the Song estate. Miss Song was to become my brother's wife in a proper and splendid manner. Father and mother were delighted with this new sister-in-law. Perhaps they had never considered Ariel Ann to be one at all. On the day of the wedding, the display was magnificent. The procession of betrothal gifts alone stretched the length of an entire street. The Shen residence was draped in red silk and lanterns. Joy filled every corner. Miss Song's wedding robes were crafted by over 100 seamstresses. They worked for a full month. Gold threads wove clouds and auspicious patterns that shimmered with every step she took. My brother was radiant, wine cup in hand, surrounded by congratulations. Amid the bustle, I seemed to glimpse Adrian Ann in the distance. I immediately pursued that fleeting figure. Afraid he might cause some disturbance, I followed him to the back courtyard, where he stopped. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. He was dressed as a servant, hair disheveled, tear streaks faint upon his pale cheeks. "I'm not here to ruin anything," he shook his head hard. "I just wanted to see what kind of wedding my sister once imagined." Then he told me. My brother had once promised Ariel Ann that when he married her, he would send an entire street of betrothal gifts and give her the most beautiful wedding gown in the world. "Claire," Adrian said softly, "I've seen it now for her. The gown is beautiful." Outside, fireworks thundered, wine cups clashed, blessings were exchanged in joyous voices, and everything Ariel once dreamed of was buried in the earth with her. "Claire?" It was my mother's voice. She called me to the outer hall to meet the young talents who had come to offer congratulations. I stood behind the screen idly watching when my gaze landed upon a man in sky-blue robes. As though sensing it, he turned slightly and raised his cup toward me from afar. Tall as a pine, refined and pale as moonlit jade, he looked like a figure who had stepped out of a painting. "That is the third-rank laureate, Zhu Yangqing," my mother whispered, amused at my fixed attention. "Do you fancy him?" I glanced at the other boisterous guests, flushed from wine, laughing too loudly, and answered with a sigh, "He will do, I suppose." I retreated behind the screen, yet the image of the laureate's fine eyes lingered in my mind. He came from a merchant family. The famed Drunken Immortal Tavern belonged to the Zhu household. Mother had already inquired. Merchants have wealth without power. Easy to handle, easy to command. She was satisfied. I myself had no objections. But upon hearing he was heir to a house of fine food, any faint hesitation I might have had vanished entirely. The Drunken Immortal's pastries were famed across the capital. If I were to marry into that house, I could eat them every day. Later, Miss Song learned of the matter and rejoiced extravagantly. She was a glutton by nature. "Is he a good man?" she pressed me, tugging my sleeve. Pearl earrings bounced against her cheeks as she shook me like a child. Brother had recently gifted her pearls from the southern sea, pure bright white, flawless and costly. "He is decent," I said. "Good enough, and handsome. More decent than brother?" Though married now and with her hair arranged like a matron, she remained endearingly childish. Round-faced and soft, she looked much like the pearls on her ears. Her world was simple. Whoever treated her gently, she adored in return. My brother's wedding had ended only a few days, when the emperor summoned me into the palace. Lydia Zuo sat beside him, garbed in bright palace silk, a blade of arrogance still between her brows. At the sight of me, a strange mix of rage and affection flashed in her eyes. She rose abruptly, then seemed to remember she now belonged to another, and forced herself back to her seat. The emperor appeared composed. He praised my work in court, then rewarded me again with bolts of rare brocade. When the eunuchs finished carrying them out, the emperor dismissed the others and kept me alone. His eyes lowered as he spoke in an unsteady voice. "Minister Shen, you truly had no choice?" He meant Lydia. He meant her public confession. And my refusal. I gave him a bow. Your Majesty need not soil himself with old matters that have already passed into smoke. He stared at me for a long time. Something bitter passed through his gaze, something like humiliation wrapped in longing. At last he dismissed me. When I stepped out of the palace gates, the spring wind was sharp as salt on my face. I knew then, the emperor was not done with me. Not long after, a decree arrived at the Shen residence, a marriage decree. It was issued in my name. The emperor himself bestowed upon me the marriage with the third-rank laureate, Zhu Yanqing. Mother nearly fainted with delight. The aristocratic daughters of the capital, who once admired Minister Shen, now stared in silence, lips pressed thin. For it was by the emperor's own hand that this marriage was sealed. And as for Lydia Zuo, news came that she smashed a whole porcelain chamber the day the decree was announced. She did not enter court for 3 days. The emperor naturally paid her visit after visit, yet none could calm her fury. As for Zhu Yanqing, upon receiving the decree, he dressed formally and knelt outside the Shen gates at dawn to present his thanks. He lifted his head only once. His eyes met mine, calm, modest, and untroubled. He was unlike most men, neither arrogant at the emperor's favor, nor fearful of the talk that shadowed my name. He greeted me with a quiet bow. Miss Shen. From that day on, he sent pastries to the Shen residence every morning. Not extravagant tokens, but the kind of delicacies one would actually eat. Sweet osmanthus cakes, river crab buns, tea-scented almond crisps. Mother praised him endlessly. Even my brother, still rigid in his new married life, admitted, "This one is gentle, steady, and does not provoke. You will not suffer with him." The wedding was set for the 10th day of the 5th month. Miss Song came to help me try on the bridal silks. She admired every fold and stitch more than I did. She leaned on my shoulder, laughing through a mouthful of candied plum. "My sister will finally marry," she said sweetly. "From now on, we will be married women together." She was bright, clean, and light as a gull on water. Nothing like the heavy, wordless woman who once stood in her place in my brother's heart. I smiled faintly. That which has died cannot rise again. That which is chosen must be carried to the end. Chapter 2. 3 days before my wedding, the emperor summoned me again. When I entered the hall, he dismissed every servant until only the 2 of us remained. He stared at me in silence for a long time. So long the candle wax had already formed a pool. At last he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Had I known you were a woman from the beginning, everything would have been different." I bent my knee and answered steadily, "There is no if in this world, Your Majesty." He clenched his jaw. A faint tremor broke through his pose of sovereign calm. Then Lydia's voice exploded outside the doors. She had come to force her way in. She screamed my name, demanded to see me face to face, demanded to know whether I had ever returned her affection. Palace guards restrained her. The emperor lowered his eyes and dismissed me with one wave. As I walked out of the hall, I could still hear her sobbing behind the screens, crying like a beast with its heart pulled out. The next morning, a scandal shook the capital. Lydia Zuo was found unconscious in Yuxiu Hall, her wrists cut. Blood ran down the carved couch and dripped onto the jade floor. The emperor sealed the palace and forbade gossip at knife point. Even so, the city boiled with speculation. Some said she could not endure being replaced. Some said she had been driven mad by jealousy. Some said she had learned the truth, that she had loved a woman all along. 3 days later, she awoke. Before anyone could restrain her, she ordered a carriage and left the palace alone to the ancestral tombs. The emperor pursued her on horseback. Thunder cracked across the sky as their procession vanished beyond the city walls. No one knows what words passed between them there. But when she returned, she was quiet, cold, and hollow. Like a sword snapped at the hilt, no longer able to cut. The day of my wedding arrived. Drums thundered, silk fluttered, firecrackers shook the street like war. Zhu Yanqing came in full formal dress, upright as a pine. He lifted the curtain of the bridal sedan chair with both hands. Just as I was about to step in, a herald galloped down the street, shouting like someone aflame. "His Majesty commands, delay the wedding, all festivities must cease at once." The musicians choked their notes. The sedan chair halted. The guests froze mid-breath. My brother strode out with murder in his eyes. What does His Majesty mean by this? The herald fell to his knees, forehead to the stone. An imperial edict will arrive in the next watch. No household may disobey. The street plunged into silence, and in that silence, a single thought pierced through me. The emperor has made his move. The imperial edict arrived at dusk. The messenger unrolled the silk and read with a voice that shook. The wedding of the Shen daughter shall be postponed. Minister Shen Claire is to enter the palace at once and serve as imperial reader to accompany the emperor's study. A neat, bloodless move. Not a forced marriage decree, but a single ink stroke was enough to halt mine. Mother trembled with fury. My brother smashed a tea table. Zhu Yanqing, however, only bowed and said calmly, "I shall wait." His restraint made the silence heavier. I changed into court robes and entered the palace as commanded, my own wedding veil discarded like an unused prop. That night, the emperor kept me in the hall of distant fragrance. He did not speak of Lydia. He did not speak of my wedding. He only poured wine, cup after cup, in utter silence. When he was drunk enough that his voice lost its armor, he spoke. "Tell me only this. If I had known you were a woman from the start, would you have stayed by my side?" I answered without hesitation, "No." The cup in his hand shattered. The next morning the decree was issued. Claire Shen will remain in the palace indefinitely to assist in imperial drafting and internal council. In other words, I was detained without walls. No prison, but no exit. I was given a quiet residence near the imperial library. Books, ink, silk quilts, everything arranged as though I had come to live out a lifetime. The emperor visited often, always speaking of policy. Never once naming the reason he had caged me there. I knew what he waited for. He waited for me to yield. He waited for time to rot my resolve. He waited for my wedding to dissolve into dust. Outside the palace, Zhu Yangqing still sent pastries every morning to the Shen residence. He did not withdraw his intention. He did not protest to the court. He simply waited, exactly as he had promised. Spring passed, then summer, then early autumn. My hair grew longer. My hand regained the callus of long writing. No word was given about my release. One night, when the moon was bright as water, the emperor summoned me to the upper terrace. He stood alone beside the railing, no guards, no servants. The night wind tugged at his sleeves as he asked, very softly, "Is there truly no path on which you remain, and I do not lose?" I bowed. "There is none." He closed his eyes as though the words had cleaved him open. After a long time, he said, "Then even if I am to die in regret, I will still not give you to another." Those words were not a confession, they were a sentence. The next dawn, a new decree was proclaimed. Zhu Yangqing is to take office in Jiangnan as regional prefect. Departure within 3 days, no delay permitted. In one stroke, the emperor exiled the man I was to marry 10,000 miles away. My brother rushed to court to protest, but the emperor silenced him with a single glance. That night, my mother fainted for the first time in her life. The Shen residents wailed as if someone had died. Only Zhu Yangqing remained unchanged. He wrote one letter, only one line. "I will return with honor and marry you then." My mother clutched that letter and wept until her voice broke. I burned the reply I had written, sealed my sleeves, and returned to the palace without a backward glance. For I understood, this was not the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a war. In the following days, the emperor avoided seeing me. He neither summoned me nor lifted the restriction on my leaving. Yet every memorial to the throne still passed through my hands. I remained his shadow in the dark, unseen but essential. On the third day, Zhu Yangqing departed for Jiangnan. He did not attempt to see me. He did not send another letter. He honored the decree without resistance, as though conceding nothing and losing nothing. That night, rain fell sharply against the tiles. I lay awake, counting each drop as though it were a blade. At the fourth watch, a eunuch came to summon me. The emperor sat alone in the pavilion of good counsel, his eyes bloodshot, his hair loose, his wine untouched. He did not look at me. He muttered only one sentence, to no one, to nothing. "Why must you be born as you are?" He then waved me away as if it hurt to see me. A month later, the Ministry of Justice submitted a memorial requesting that my confinement be formally lifted. The emperor refused to approve. The court murmured restlessly. No one dared speak it aloud, but all understood. The emperor was not acting as sovereign, he was acting as a man, That same month, Lydia Zuo reappeared at court. She looked thinner, calmer, and colder than before. Her eyes no longer flared when they met mine, only a bleak stillness remained. She spoke to the emperor softly, without tears. "Since your majesty refuses to let her marry, then at least do not let her rot in the palace. Release her, and I will never mention her name again." The emperor's hand tightened on the armrest until his knuckles turned white. He said nothing. Another edict was issued instead. Claire Shen will henceforth serve as instructor to Imperial Noble Consort Lydia, and accompany her in all palace study sessions. The court was stunned, to bind the living wound to the blade that made it bleed. That was the meaning of this decree. When I went to pay my respects, Lydia was burning sandalwood. She neither looked at me nor bid me rise. After a long silence, she said, "I once waited for you to turn back even once. You never did." I answered neither remorse nor comfort. There are wounds that rot deeper if one touches them. She closed her eyes and ended the audience with only, "Sit, read." So I sat and read, like a ghost reading to another ghost. Autumn deepened. The emperor's visits to Lydia grew frequent again, not out of affection, but out of guilt heavy as iron. Guilt is a kind of chain. Once fastened, it drags both prisoner and jailer alike. I continued drafting memorials by day and reading to Lydia by night. We barely spoke. Sometimes she listened. Sometimes she stared ahead with a face as expressionless as a burial mask. Once she asked quietly without looking at me, "If we were to exchange places, would you have chosen differently than I did?" I closed the scroll. No one escapes their own nature. For a long time she said nothing. Then she gave a faint, fading smile. Then neither of us was wrong. We were merely born in the wrong fates. Winter arrived with brutal swiftness. Snow weighed the palace roofs like white stone. One midnight, the emperor summoned me again. When I entered, he dismissed all attendants. His candle had nearly burned out. He stood by the lattice window and did not turn around as he spoke. "I will send Lydia away. She will leave the palace and return to the frontier." The words struck the silence like iron on ice. To exile her was to sever his last atonement, to declare that even guilt would no longer restrain him. He still did not face me as he whispered, "Tell me once, only once, that you would have stayed if time began anew." I answered with the same truth that had once broken him. "No." He finally turned then, not in anger, but in something worse, a grief so quiet it could extinguish entire empires. Chapter 3. The next morning, Lydia Zuo was summoned to court. When she emerged from the Hall of Government Affairs, her face was pale but composed. She did not weep. She did not rage. She merely turned toward the direction of the frontier, as though her soul had already left ahead of her body. That evening she came to see me. No ornaments, no cosmetics, only a plain cloak. She stood beneath the lantern outside my quarters and said, "I am leaving tomorrow." I rose to salute her. She studied me for a while, then asked, "You will not say even a single word to stop me?" I met her gaze. "You are not someone who would stay even if asked." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there were no tears, only exhaustion. "All right, then let this be the last time I ever look upon you." She walked away without turning back. I remained beneath the lantern until the oil burned out. Lydia Zuo departed the palace before dawn. Snow fell silently, covering her tracks before the sun rose. The emperor did not go to see her off. He remained in the council hall, reading the same page for 2 hours without turning it once. By noon, an entirely different decree was issued. Claire Shen is henceforth promoted to Chief Secretary of Internal Court Affairs to assist His Majesty day and night. The court was shaken. That position was closer to the emperor than any concubine, any prince, or any minister. Lydia had not yet passed the city gates, and already he had given me the place she once occupied in proximity. The meaning was blatant. It was not favor. It was possession. From that day forward, I dined in the emperor's private hall. We read state papers together, side by side. We shared one lamp, one desk, one silence. Yet there were no tender words, no touches, no confessions. He did not reach for what he could not name aloud. He merely refused to let me go. One night, when the hour grew deep, he suddenly asked, "Had you married Ju Yongqing, would your life have been peaceful?" I answered honestly, "Yes." He shut his eyes. The veins of pain pulsed in his tightened fist. "Then peace is the one thing I cannot give you." A letter arrived from Jiangnan. The river had flooded, bandits had risen, refugees starved in thousands. Zhu Yunqing was said to be organizing relief by selling off his own estates. Mother fell ill from worry. My brother asked the emperor to dispatch support troops. The emperor refused. Not for strategy, not for policy, not for military concern. He refused because the man starving in Jiangnan was the man I was supposed to marry. That night I confronted him. If Jiangnan falls into chaos, the empire will not remain untouched. He replied without lifting his gaze, "Let the empire shake then, but I will not allow him enough merit to come back for you." The following morning, another memorial kneeled before the throne. It came not from officials, but from the people. Thousands of signatures, bloody thumbprints pressed upon the paper. They begged, "Spare Jiangnan, spare the lives of the people." I watched the emperor read it, his face like a mask carved from ice. At last he spoke. "Draft the reply." I lowered my eyes. "What shall I write?" He answered, "Write that the suffering of thousands weighs less than losing one person. I refuse to surrender." For the first time since my confinement, my hand trembled holding the brush. Outside, the palace bells tolled like a funeral. That night I could not sleep. I sat beneath the lamp, staring at the words I had written, words that would condemn tens of thousands. I had once believed myself sharper and colder than most, but for the first time, my fingers would not obey the will of my mind. Then a guard arrived in haste. "Your ladyship, there is movement at the southern gate." I went at once. A carriage was attempting to leave the capital at midnight. Inside sat Lydia Zuo. She had not actually gone far. She had remained at the outskirts, waiting. She had come back, not for the emperor, but to kneel before the gate and submit a memorial to spare Jiangnan. No tears, no collapse, just a kneeling figure under the snow. I watched from the shadows and did not step forward. Some people burn by staying, some burn by leaving. She burned by returning to beg for the people. The emperor was forced to see her. She stood before him, thin as a reed, hands cracked with cold. Her voice was steady. "You may ruin me, but you must not ruin the people." A long silence followed. She did not raise her head. Finally the emperor said, "I will send troops." She closed her eyes for one breath, not in relief, but in exhaustion. Then she said something I did not expect, "And send Claire with them." The emperor's composure snapped. "You presume too far." Lydia did not flinch. "If she does not leave your side, you will never release Jiangnan from your grip. Send her away, and you will be forced to think of the empire again." They argued for a long time. Lydia spoke without trembling once. At last, the emperor spoke between clenched teeth. "If Claire goes south and never returns, would that satisfy you?" Lydia answered only, "It would save the realm." He dismissed her with a furious wave, then turned his gaze to me. "Is that what you want as well?" I answered him plainly. "If I stay, you will continue to destroy for my sake. I must leave." A sound escaped his throat. Not speech, not breath. Something closer to a wound being torn open. At dawn the decree was issued. Claire Shen is appointed special envoy to Jiangnan to inspect and relieve the crisis. I packed only ink, paper, and a cloak. Before departing, I went to see Lydia for the first time by choice. She was lighting incense. We faced each other in silence. Finally she said, "If there is another life, I do not wish to meet you again." I bowed. "Then let this life be the last." We did not look at each other again. I departed the capital under heavy snow. At the city gate, a lone rider waited. Not Lydia, not my brother, not my mother. It was the emperor. No guards, no attendants. Only him, holding the reins with one ungloved hand. He did not speak. I did not dismount. Wind cut between us. At last he looked up and said, very quietly, "If you do not return, then I will have nothing left to restrain me." I answered without softening, "Then learn to restrain yourself without me." He closed his eyes, as though that sentence had slain him more cleanly than any blade. I touched my horse and rode past him. He did not turn. Nor did I. The road to Jiangnan was long and bitter. Floods had drowned fields to the horizon. Villages lay in mud. Refugees clung to trees like ghosts. When I reached the prefectural hall, Zhu Yunqing was there, thinner but steady as before. He rose when he saw me. There was no shock, no joy, no bitterness, only a quiet bow. "You came." I nodded. We spoke of nothing personal. We unrolled maps, we listed rations, we drafted commands, we worked side by side until dawn bled into the sky. Not once did he mention my vanished wedding. Some people love by clutching. Some by waiting, he loved by continuing. Within half a month, order began to return, but plague followed famine, and corpses swelled along the riverbanks. We needed grain, now not later. I wrote a memorial urging immediate transfer from Western reserves. It reached the capital in 3 days. The reply returned in 6 words: wait for spring distribution schedule. A sentence written by a hand that had never seen a corpse. That night, I broke the imperial seal and sent a second memorial directly. Before spring arrives, the living will be dead. The answer came back at once, not in ink, but in command. Claire Shen is to return to the capital immediately. I burned the decree. To break the crisis, we needed grain and we needed a name to take the blame. Zhu Yangqing volunteered the blame. If we break the warehouses without decree, I will sign the order. If the court sends for a head, let them take mine. I stared at him. He did not tremble. He did not plead. He merely meant what he said. I will not allow you to be executed, he answered gently. Then do not fail. That night we broke the government stores and fed 10,000 mouths. The wailing stopped for the first time in months. As expected, the capital erupted. A third decree was issued. Zhu Yangqing is to be arrested and escorted to the capital for trial. The soldiers arrived 4 days later. Zhu Yangqing washed and dressed in formal robes. He walked out to meet them without resistance. Before he mounted the prison cart, I asked him one question. Are you afraid? He shook his head. I only fear leaving you here alone. Then he was taken. His figure did not once turn back. Once he was gone, the local officials lost their spine. Relief stalled. Bandits rose again. Without his quiet steadiness beside me, my thoughts felt like cold metal, clear but ruthless. I drafted a proclamation in my own name and sent riders through the provinces. Any who obstruct grain or refuge will be executed on sight. It was a blade drawn without imperial sanction, but fear is sometimes faster than law. By the 5th day, wagons of food arrived. People prostrated in the mud, calling my name. Their tears were warm on my frozen hands. And for the first time since I entered the palace as a youth, I felt I was doing something not for duty, but for justice. Just when stability returned, a messenger from the capital arrived, not with grain, not with troops, but with a verdict. Zhu Yangqing is found guilty of treasonous action and awaits execution at the autumn assizes. The ink was still fresh. The words were clean, too clean, as if the emperor had been waiting to carve them. I did not sleep that night. Before dawn, I mounted my horse and began the ride back to the capital. Wind flayed my face raw. The farther north I rode, the lighter my body felt, until I realized it was not lightness, but emptiness. As though something inside me was already being hollowed out in advance to make room for the blow to come. Chapter 4. When I reached the capital, the execution ground was already built. Zhu Yangqing knelt beneath the platform, his robes unstained, his expression calm. He looked as he always did, as though nothing in this world could make him undignified. We were separated by soldiers and iron pikes. He raised his eyes and saw me. No despair, no panic. Only the faintest curve of relief, as if to say, "You came." When the officer raised the execution token, I stepped forward and presented a memorial sealed in blood. I, Claire Shen, accept full responsibility. I alone ordered the warehouse to be opened. Release him. Behead me instead. A shock rippled through the crowd. Zhu Yangqing's lips moved silently behind the guards. No. Before the token could fall, a eunuch arrived at full gallop. He held aloft a golden decree. A decree the emperor had written at the 11th hour. The autumn assizes are suspended. The court will reconvene for retrial. A murmur flooded the square. Zhu Yangqing exhaled only once, as though he had been holding his breath for days. He was dragged away in chains, but alive. I followed the escort toward the prison gate. A guard blocked my path. The emperor commands. Lady Claire is not permitted to visit. I did not argue. I only looked once through the bars at the corridor beyond. That was enough. That night I was summoned to the palace. The emperor sat alone under a lantern, half his face swallowed by shadow. He spoke without lifting his gaze. He is alive because I allowed it. I answered, and thousands in Jiangnan are alive because he allowed it. Silence pressed between us like stone. At last he asked, voice low, "If I spare him, will you stay?" I answered with the same truth I had always given him. No. His hand trembled on the armrest. Something ancient and furious and ruined flashed through his eyes and died there. The retrial opened 3 days later. The officials debated until their tongues went dry. The evidence was undeniable. Zhu Yangqing had saved lives, not sought rebellion. But law is not made of reason. Law is made of power. And power sat on the throne. At the end of the session, the emperor rose and issued the final ruling himself. Zhu Yangqing is stripped of rank and exiled to the western frontier. He shall never return to the capital. The hall fell to its knees. I did not kneel. I looked straight at the emperor. He did not look at me. For the first time, he did not even try. Exile to the western frontier was a living death. Few survived the journey, fewer returned. Zhu Yangqing accepted the sentence without resistance. Before he departed, I went to see him one last time. He was already in chains, ready to be escorted out of the city. When he saw me, he bowed, not like a prisoner, but like a man greeting his equal. I asked him, "Do you regret it?" He shook his head. If we had not opened the granaries, those people would have died. I would make the same choice again. The escort urged him forward. As he passed me, he paused only long enough to say, "Live well." He did not ask me to wait. He did not ask me to follow. He did not ask for anything. He left me with nothing to carry, except the weight of having been cherished without condition. When I returned to the palace, winter had broken into thaw. The emperor seemed older. Grief, restraint, and obsession had carved deep lines into his face. He summoned me not to argue, not to plead, but only to sit. We shared silence for a long time. At last he said, "When I exiled him, you did not break. When I detained you, you did not bend. When I ruined your wedding, you did not yield." He looked at me as if studying a wound that refused to rot. "Tell me, what do I have to destroy before I reach the part of you that bleeds?" I answered, "Nothing in me belongs to you." He shut his eyes. That was the cruelest blow I had ever delivered, and I spoke it without tremor. From that day forward, he stopped summoning me. He did not release me. He simply withdrew, as though abandoning a battlefield he could not conquer. I continued working in silence, handling memorials and state papers. Lydia Zuo never returned from the frontier. No letters came. My brother no longer spoke her name. He and Mei Song lived in a steady, gentle quiet, the kind that looks like peace if one never examines it closely. The court moved on. The world moved on. Only I remained where I had always been, between two lives, belonging to neither. In the second spring after the exile, a revolt rose in the western frontier. The emperor summoned me at once. His voice was flat. "The first garrison has been slaughtered. The exiles have been seized as hostages. Among them is Zhu Yangqing." I stood very still. The emperor watched for any crack in my composure. I gave him none. After a long silence, I asked, "What is your majesty's command?" He answered, "You will go to negotiate. They asked for you by name." So even those at the edge of the world knew. I was the one thread that bound court and conscience together. Before departure, the emperor met me alone. He did not speak immediately. Finally, he asked, "If you go again, will you return this time?" I answered with the last truth he would ever receive from my mouth. "If I return, it will not be for you." He did not try to stop me. This time he understood stopping me was not the same as keeping me. When I walked past him, he did not reach out. He simply stood there. A man who had finally learned the cost of loving without permission. The journey to the frontier was harsher than before. Sandstorms tore skin from bone. Corpses lay half buried in dunes, eyes still open. When we reached the rebel camp, I saw the exiles bound in rows, half-starved, sunburned, barely human. Zhu Yangqing was among them. He had lost weight to the point of fragility, yet his back remained straight. When he saw me, his expression did not break. Not with hope, not with despair. Only a faint, steady calm, as if he were relieved that I still lived. The rebel chief received me in a ruined shrine. He was blunt. "We want safe passage south and resettlement. Grant this, and we release the hostages. Refuse, and we kill them first." His blade tapped the table. "You will write the decree." I wrote, "Not a decree but a conditional treaty. Resettlement shall be granted after disarmament, oath of peace, and public surrender." The rebel chief read it and laughed. "You bargain as if you have soldiers behind you. You came alone." He leaned forward. "Change the terms, or I execute Zhu Yangqing first." He dragged Zhu Yangqing before us and forced him to his knees. Blood dried at the corner of Zhu's mouth. He turned his head slightly, just enough to look at me, not pleading, not resisting, merely present. The rebel chief pressed the sword to his neck. "Well, will you revise it?" I did not blink. "No," the rebel chief sneered. "Then watch him die." The blade arced downward. A roar split the sky. Imperial banners flooded the horizon, an ambush encircling the camp. The emperor had sent troops after all. The rebel lines collapsed in terror. Men scattered like ash in a gale. In the chaos, Zhu Yongqing was dragged back by soldiers. Only then did I see, stitched into the inside of my cloak, a strip of silk bearing the emperor's handwriting. "You negotiate, I will wait in the dark." So he had not trusted words. He had followed behind my shadow with steel. The emperor's health collapsed with the last thaw of winter. On the night the bells tolled for him, I stood beyond the palace gates, not inside, not kneeling, only watching the glow of the morning lanterns spill across the frost. He left no decree for me, no confession, no forgiveness, no final chain. His last act was absence. 3 days later, I packed my things and left the capital at dawn. No escort, no carriage, no witnesses. Beyond the city walls, the world was painfully wide and painfully alive. Somewhere in the west, Zhu Yongqing still breathed. Somewhere beyond any border, Lydia Zuo's death or survival remained unwritten. Somewhere in the shadows of the empire, Adrian lived under a name not his own. Nothing had been finished. Nothing had been resolved. But for the first time in my life, I was walking toward a future not chosen for me. Not by an oath. Not by an emperor. Not by a grave. I did not look back. Because some lives are not meant to be tied to ruins. They are meant to walk out of them.